Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
From the London school, you moved over to Cambridge. You said because London was thus, at that point of time, getting the impact of the war. What was life then, the economic impact of the war?
Well, my own personal life was, I lived a very frugal life during my first year, and therefore I was able to manage with what I had saved when I was in Calcutta and also my earned leave salaries and so on. I could have done the same thing for the second year also. I must say that during my stay in London, I had free room given to me by the YMCA in London, and so I used to pay for my food, on which I spent only £3 a week.
Dream.
And that's how I was able to live quite sweet. But when I came to a second year and moving over to Cambridge, I had two desires in order to have more resources, more money per month. One was that I wanted to get myself few important economic books which you can't get in India, so that I could take back a small library with me when I went back. And secondly, I wanted to bring my wife over with the first child we had. I had married very early when I was in Calcutta University, first year there, my staying there. I had married. My wife belonged to an important Nadar family, and so there was a big row over my marrying a Nadar girl. In those days, as I was telling you, we were divided Christians into these three groups, Valalas, Nadars and scheduled castes, and crossing the line was really more difficult if you're a Christian than you were a Hindu, because I suppose we were a small number. But after the first year...
Was it an arranged marriage, doctor?
No. In this case, it was. But my wife was in the Presidency College at the time when I was in Loyola College. She did her honours MA in English, and as I did my honours in economics. And after I had left Calcutta, she took a job, first in Saratoga College, where she found she couldn't manage because she was used so much to Bangalore and Madras kind of culture. So she came to Madras and got a job as lecturer in English in Women's Christian College. And when I was away for the first test, that's what she was doing. And then I was able to get a job in England because I told you that I had finished writing my thesis. So in the second year, I was able to concentrate on two things. One was to attend the MSc lectures in order to catch up with the latest theories in economics. And the second was to buy some books with this money. Now, the job I had was a very interesting one. There was a university organization in England. They wanted an international secretary. They meant by international secretary, in all the British universities, there were foreign students from Asia, from Africa, and from other European countries. So they had appointed me as international secretary for the overseas university students. The result of that was that I spent 2 years when I was in Cambridge, traveling all over England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, North and South Ireland, everything, visiting all the universities. And most of the overseas students were, of course, Africans. There were a few Chinese, a few Japanese, a few Indians, a few Pakistanis, and a large number of East Europeans, Bulgarians, Czechoslovakians, and so on. So I used to meet these people and talk to them about their needs, and my main job was to bring their wishes and desires to the attention of the Vice Chancellors. It was a very interesting job. Now, you were asking me about then the economic condition in London and Cambridge. The first year of the war did not have much of an impact. There was a certain amount of rationing and scarcity beginning. Not scarcity so much as rationing, because they want to be sure what food was available. Butter and bread and all this were equally shared by all the people. So before the war, there was no rationing. Immediately, sometime after the war, rationing began. And both when I was in London and when I was in Cambridge and when I was traveling all over, I had to have coupons for a certain number of things. Now, that is the only part of the impact of the war on my life and life of the people that I could talk of.
Earlier, Doctor, you said about the chasm you noticed in India between economic theory as once you studied and the actual living conditions with a predominant rural country. It was a real big chasm you mentioned. What was your experience in the developed...
I didn't try to face this and find a solution for this when I was in Britain, in London or Cambridge. There I simply concentrated on mastering the theory and the model building part of economics. When it came to my PhD, you'll notice that I had already tried to apply what economic principles and theories I had developed to the Indian conditions, and I'll come to that. And that is why I had chosen seasonal variation in the demand for money in India. Now, coming back to my work with Cambridge, the advantage of Cambridge was a great advantage. I was able to have both the London School of Economics lectures and the Cambridge seminars. Keynes, for instance, had a seminar every week. Henderson had a seminar every week. So I used to go to these seminars because there were more work being done by seminars and by individuals, contact with the teachers rather than lectures, you see, and library work, of course. Now, at the same time, my guide, Professor Barrett Vale, also had moved. Or the whole London School of Economics had moved except the library which is there.
Professor Lasky also moved,
Everybody. And so I was able to see him every month, twice a month or so, and go on my work. Now, I think that, as I said to you, I now had enough money to bring my wife over. My wife and daughter came over, and we spent 2 years in Cambridge. And at that time, I had a letter from the principal of Madras College, Alexander Boyd, urging me to come back to my home university. I'd been away in Calcutta and, of course, in London.
But you didn't have contact with Professor Boyd earlier. Did you?
I did not know him at all. He said to me, look here, Christian College now is about 150 years old. It has had all the departments, all the disciplines except economics.
Oh.
Because economics was regarded at that time, even Oxford and Cambridge, the last discipline to come in was economics. They regarded economics as something which is to do with the marketplace, nothing to do with high academic, classical thinking and so on. And it was gradually that people like Marshall and Pigou and John Anderson who brought economics to a level of respectability. And so the Christian College is following the tradition of Oxford and Cambridge, also the Scottish universities. Though Adam Smith was a Scotsman born there and wrote the economic classic of Wealth of Nations. They did not, even the Scottish University did not have economics. So Boyd said to me, I would like you to come and start at Department of Economics here, and I give you complete freedom to do what you want to do. So I reflected over that and I thought, well, that would be much better than for me I would like to create this thing. And so I accepted it and came back to Madras. And coming back was a little bit of a drama because my wife and I and child, we got into a Japanese boat, which was the cheapest, about 40 pounds, I think, for each, which came all the way. There's no question of coming across France to cut short the time because the bombing was taking place. And I was in the Japanese ship, which was at that time neutral, and neither Germany nor England, either Allies nor the Nazi group would disturb Japanese.
It was safe then, was it?
Safe. And we left Manchester and came round, and when we stopped somewhere in Spain, Salamanca or somewhere, and then went on to Suez, then Italy declared war and began bombing Suez. So the Japanese commander got instructions from Tokyo, turned back and came back to Spain, where he provisioned himself for a long journey for 2 months, and we went round Africa, Ghana, the Cape and so on, Madagascar, and came to Bombay. So this took us 3 months instead of a 2 to 3 week journey, 3 months. And I used the occasion in order to prepare myself for the job, for what I was going to do. So as soon as I landed in Madras, I went straight to Madras College and told Boyd that this is what I'm going to do. He said, go ahead. Nobody knew anything about economics there at that time. And so I started the department with 50 to 60 students, I think, the past course, and decided to limit my honors course to 15.
1-5.
And on the basis of theories that I'd learned when I was in England and so on, I decided to insist that the honors course students would be group 1, particularly mathematics, because I wanted them to work on quantitative economics. Modern economics was impossible without knowledge of mathematics and quantitative. So I found that after a month or so, there was a certain amount of resistance, there was a certain amount of uneasiness in Madras College that I was limiting the intake to only science group students, mathematics.
But it was not the practice followed in the other colleges which offered economics in Madras.
None of them. Because You see, I don't think any other college was concerned with the quantitative side of economics, you see. And I knew the future of economics is with quantitative side. You can't take a journal and read, understand a journal unless you had econometrics, quantitative, mathematical economics grounding.
You thought nearly 3 decades ahead.
So because of Boyd called me and said, look here, you can't completely cut off non-science students from your group. Allow at least 10 or 20%. So I took 3 students, added 3 more to my 15, made them 18. Some of the most outstanding students from the arts side. And I'm telling you that this paid off first because I had my first group consisted of graduate, first class, 3 in the presidency was from my class. And the first was Jagatpati, Mr. Jagatpati, who after I left, he took 1 year as a lecturer in Christian College. Then he got into it and he was one of the first. And then he ended up by being Secretary of Home Affairs when I was in Parliament, and he was Chief Secretary. He belonged to Madhya Pradesh College.
He worked also, I think, for the steel plant at Bhilai.
Oh, yes, he did. He's also started the Applied Institute of Manpower in Delhi. He's the man who started it. When he was Joint Secretary in Ministry of Home Affairs. Second first class was K.N. Raj. And then K.N. Raj decided not to do what, there's great demand for these first class students. He decided to follow my example, but unlike me, he asked my advice. I said, I think you should work for 4 or 5 years before going to London. Only then you'll really know what you want to, how you want to get it.
As you did.
But he said, no, I'll go now, I must go now. He went and did very well there. He took got my copy of my thesis from the library, studied it, and he also did something on money. And after 2 years came back, was in the Reserve Bank, and then after 1 year he came back to Delhi University and developed
Planning Commission
as
and
a
all.
top academic. And there were other people. The third was a man, Vasudev, who joined the Reserve Bank of India and is now and ended up as being deputy governor. So this paid off.
What was the type of experiment you were doing, Doctor? You had tremendous amount of interest in applying.
I found myself in this position. I knew that to get these students to pass the Madras University examination, I'll have to teach them according to the syllabus, the theory. But I was able to raise it to a very high level because I had obtained this background in London and Cambridge. But I realized then that it had absolutely no relation to the conditions in our country. And so what I did was I formed a rural service league consisting of the students of the honors classes who started with 15, 18 and then went on to second year, third year. All of them joined. And we used to go every day to Tambaram Russian College, is surrounded by 12 villages. We adopted those 12 villages and divided ourselves into 12 groups. And every day we'd go to one of the villages, spend 2 hours there on agricultural problems, rural problems, health problems, literacy problems, and so on.
Your admiration of Tagore at Sriniketan was a big help.
Not only admiration, my experience there was a great help. And so after 2 years, I went to Boyd and said, look here, I think that this Rural Service League and the work of the 12 villages is flourishing, is growing, and there's a demand that we do a little more. I would like you to give me 1 hectare of land because there was a huge place. And he gave me 1 hectare of land, and on that we built a big, long thatched shed where we had continuous work, and we worked on hand-pound rice, which was sold to the hostels. We did handloom weaving, the yarn of which we sold to some of the mills around about. Then we had handmade paper, all kinds of this kind of. And one of the things I did was then I and some of my students, like K.N. Raj and Jagat, so we studied the economics of these things. See? What is the cost? What is the return? How could this cost be reduced? How could the return be increased? This sort of thing in that sense, we try to apply the classical supply-demand theory of economics to these rural industries. And then I also extended this to, we had a small farm, and there we experimented with dryland crops like ragi and cholam and kambu, as well as paddy, sugarcane and so on. And then we also had a small cattle growing, and all the things that we had produced, we were able to market because there's a tremendous market with this. And then we had poultry. And what we were doing is not our work, we were getting the villagers to work on this. You see? The villagers were slowly learning these things, and women came and learned, and then they did the same thing, and they were able to increase their incomes.
While discussing UNESCO, my quotation of Clement Attlee was very fresh in my mind. It stated, "Since war began in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men the defense of peace must be constructed." Attlee said this at the inaugural conference of UNESCO in 1946 in a war-torn London, often used to be quoted by Dr. Adiseshiah. And the transformation of the body, which originally thought essentially to reconstruct the educational institutions which were ravaged by war, into a very powerful development instrument on a global plane, had been by and large the work of Dr. Adiseshiah, almost single-handed. Though his modesty, he would say that he got all the support of UNESCO and all. Looking into the history of UNESCO, this direction on the development facets of economics and using UNESCO's resources effectively to improve education, literacy, and the whole lot of this. And actually, I would like to start this discussion with Dr. Adiseshiah on this area. His stress on education as an important development tool. Doctor.
Well, I think that there were a number of highlights during my 24 years association with UNESCO, work with it and for it. One was, as you said, that an inspiration from the Clement Attlee quotation statement about wars beginning in the minds of men and the defense of peace having to be created in the minds of men, which is education. And that was written into the Constitution of UNESCO. UNESCO's Constitution begins with these resounding words. And so I would say that the great highlight in my association with UNESCO was, in a sense, for me, discovery, and for others, for UNESCO, that education is the powerful instrument for development, total development of the mind, body, and spirit. And I spent the 23 years making this point in seminars, in conferences, in symposia, and in the papers that I wrote at the request of these some of these learned bodies. And the members of the General Assembly of UNESCO who had followed some of my statements in the seminars and symposia, and some of them who read these papers, then got together and passed two resolutions. In 1968, they passed a resolution asking UNESCO to bring together Adiseshiah's statements and papers on education as being the basis for development, the tool of development, and publish it. Now, that was done, and in 1970, just as I was leaving UNESCO, the book came out, Let My Country Awake. That is the title I gave it, and the word my country there does not mean India, which is my country, but is all countries which are in need of this kind of and educational prodding. And that goes for both so-called developing and so-called developed countries. I think that's a great highlight, and I would say that the various conferences that I used, continental conferences, to get education and science and technology moving in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, was followed then out of the first great conference in Ababa, in Karachi, Ababa, and Santiago de Chile. Every 2 years there was a conference, but this time we had pulled in not only the ministers of education for these conferences from each country, but also the Ministry of Economic Affairs, because there's a link between education and development. You see, it's part of the planned development of the country. Now, when I left in 1970, then that year, the General Assembly passed another resolution thanking the Director General for publishing my papers, but asking that they should publish a second book containing more recent papers that I had written and my statements and so on the academic side. And that second book is called It Is Time to Begin. That is to say, we had no time to lose
discussing the theory.
In linking education to development, you see.
Doctor, what was your schedule in Paris like? Having heard you, a prodigious output as a student, as a teacher, did it vary much at Paris?
Well, I think that I had to spend about 9 months of the year traveling in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe and United States, also giving the developed countries information about what they should do in order to promote the development of the underdeveloped countries. Now, I think that during that period, and even when I was traveling, I was able to give my mind to the theoretical aspects of this question, and therefore wrote my papers that time. Now, I would say that second thing I want to say is that I was not very anxious to stay on. I was very keen to come back to India. I had a very clear idea. I had resigned from my job in Madras College. I thought I'd come back and do something. But what happened was that every time, as I said to you earlier, that I used to take a contract only for 2 years at a time because I thought I'll come back. But I found that every time after the contract, UNESCO used to say to me, this job has to be done, please do it. And in fact, the two important decisions they made was first when they elected me Assistant Director General in 1956, which is to turn UNESCO from being a intellectual cooperation, clearinghouse kind of activity to an operational activity plus the intellectual exchange activity, not one or the other. And I did this. As I said earlier, that I started the UNESCO's technical assistance program with a check with $3 million a year. When I left UNESCO, I had already developed the operational program to a point when we had $300 million a year from the World Bank, from the UNDP and UNESCO's own resources.
A hundredfold growth.
So that was I would say that was another highlight.
Doctor, in evaluating this various programs you initiated, are you happy with the progress made by the aid receiving countries? Which of those you consider have effectively utilized all this assistance and which have not, and possibly the reason?
Well, I think that it's very difficult to evaluate that because don't forget that external assistance, even of the so-called large kind which India receives every year through the Aid India Consortium, for example, is really about 1/20th or 1/30th of the total investment that India is making from its own resources for its development. This is true throughout the world. And the United Nations total effort is still more minuscule in the total effort of the countries and of the developed countries, the bilateral aid and so on. So I think it's very important and I always resist the temptation to say that UNESCO has done this, UNESCO has done. It is the country which has done it, and we have been able to assist.
And catalyze it.
Now, the question that you were asking also was, are there countries which were using the assistance of UNESCO optimally? I think the countries which are doing that at the national level, outstanding countries were India, Egypt, Mexico, for instance, these three countries were using every paise, every dollar. Other countries were not wasting the resources, but were not ready. Therefore, there was a certain amount of time delay.
Do you think this is because of the good infrastructure in terms of administration, in terms of the ability to absorb it and use it better in these countries?
I think that is because they had a very good planned program, national, internal, and they were then able to integrate assistance coming from outside into that system. Now, I'd like to, I said that when in 1956 I was elected Assistant Director General, and in 1962, 6 years later, again made that, to turn UNESCO into an operating agency in 1956, which I did. Then in 1960, I was wondering whether I had not finished this, should I not go back? And at that time, Africa became independent, and then they elected me as Deputy Director General and told me your job now is to bring Africa to the level at which we have countries like India, Mexico, and so on. So it went on like this. These are the high points. There were also problems I had to face. One problem was that I had no support all my career in UNESCO from the government. This is rather serious sometimes because UNESCO, like all United Nations, is an intergovernmental body. And all the staff members there are not academicians, are appointed by the governments, represented the governments, and supported therefore by government at every stage. Now, I said yesterday to you that I was in the running, I was nominated for the Director General of UNESCO. Did I say that yesterday?
Yes, you did that.
Well, I think that that is because, my work as technical assistant, whether I was director, technical assistant, or I was assistant director general, or deputy director general, whatever my position, whatever my terms of reference were, I kept the operation in my hand. You see, I was the kingpin for the operation, so I was tremendously popular. And the General Conference, for instance, when I came on the scene, it was transformed. Now, and so the Africans, when they became independent, when I helped them after 2 years, their organization, African Unity, nominated me. And I said no, and I think I explained earlier on why I said no. I gave only one reason. First,
you could not ensure, it's tough, I understand, that the administrators in Delhi could not have cashed in on it because they would have got an excellent representative to head them
Well, I said no. What I earlier explained was that I said no to this thing. First, for two technical reasons. One was that there was a senior person to me in UNESCO who wanted desperately to become Director General. So I said to them that they wouldn't accept it. But I went and told him that this is happening, and he arranged with his government. And this is the point, that everywhere the governments were working for their candidates, you see.
It unfortunately did not happen
through all the embassies, their embassies throughout the world, they work on this and so on. So this is what I said yesterday, earlier on, about why I turned it down. Now, today I want to say to you, to that I should add that the fact that I had no support from India. At the time when the Africans proposed me as Director General, the Latin Americans joined with that. But not a word from India. And so I decided that I couldn't go on being head of the United Nations Educational Organization without the support. And the reason for that is what you said. That is, I did not come either from the political party, well, I was not a politician, or from the bureaucracy. You see, one of the senior civil servants later on, like
such a powerful clan to back
for instance, B.R. Sen, who was Director General FAO, he was here Secretary of Agriculture, you see. So I was then very glad, firm in my decision, and my wife completely agreed with me to quit at the end. And I used the occasion of becoming 60 in 1970 to tell UNESCO, the Director General, I'm not staying on, don't offer me any more contracts.
But Doctor, 60 was not the age for retirement in those conditions.
No. At the level of the age of retirement is 65. At the lower levels, at the level of Director General and Deputy Director General, there's no age bar. You see. Only when you become feeble. Now, I told the Director General, no, I'm leaving on 1970. I leave for my country. And Mrs. Gandhi, I told her, before she left.
She was representing India and UN.
In 1968, she was representing India on the UNESCO Executive Board. And so I received a cable via the Indian ambassador, I think Mr. Milka Singh, from External Affairs Ministry, asking me, I was leaving Delhi on the 27th or 28th of December to come straight to Delhi. I was leaving Paris on 27th, 28th of December, straight to Delhi for debriefing. I was surprised, debriefing, because debriefing is undertaken from a person who comes from a organization. I didn't come from the government. I had nothing to debrief about. I was not going to tell them anything of UNESCO's inner workings and so on. That would be really betrayal. And particularly because I was an academic, they regard as an irresponsible academic. So didn't represent the government of India anywhere. Anyway, I responded to the request and I came to Delhi. I reached Delhi, I think, on the 30th or something. Mrs. Gandhi had dissolved parliament on the 22nd, 23rd, something. She had then a minority position. You remember? It was being supported by the CPI and the DMK. Supported her strongly. But she couldn't go on with this and declared new elections. And when I saw her, the only debriefing there was my interview with Mrs. Gandhi. She was very glad to see me and my wife. We were great friends, my wife particularly. And then she said to me, I want you to please take a Congress ticket. She offered me a ticket. I said, why? Why do you want me to?
I mean, she wanted you to contest the elections as a congressman.
Oh. So I said, and she was very frank. She said, I'd like you, if you accept it, you will be elected. You will be in the Congress. And I want you to helping me with the Minister of Education or Minister of Finance, Minister of one of the ministries. So I said, Ms. Gandhi, I thank you very much. I've done enough of international politics for 23 years, 25 years. Now I want to go back to my academic work and do some academic work, return to academic life. And she said, well, where are you going to do this? She said, I said, I'm going to Madras because I have an Institute of Development Studies, which I founded there. And then she said, why don't you do it here in Delhi? Why do you go to the backwoods?
One more such institute in Delhi.
So I said, Mrs. Gandhi, I just want to warn you, and as I warned your father, that it is this kind of mental attitude, outlook about South India and Madras being the backwoods that has led to the secessionist movement in the South, and DMK and DK and so on. And she laughed, and then she passed me on to other congressmen like C. Subramaniam, who's then, I think, president of the Congress, All India Congress, in order to try to persuade me. But I refused to be persuaded. And the news leaked out to the opposite side, that is to say, Ashok Mehta and his group, who were the Congress O, you see. And they tried to persuade me, and they used Kamraj. I said no there, I say no to you, I'm going back. And so we came back to Madras.